not because of a single missile strike, not because of a single political speech, but because of something far more dangerous, a chain reaction that is now rippling through the global economy, triggered by a deepening confrontation between the United States and Iran. What began as a regional military escalation has rapidly evolved into a financial shock with global consequences. Oil markets are surging, supply chains are tightening, and inside Washington, alarm signals are growing louder by the hour. At the center of this crisis is one narrow waterway, the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point through which nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply flows. Any disruption here does not remain local. It travels instantly into fuel prices, into inflation, into stock markets, and ultimately into the daily lives of millions. In recent days, tensions have escalated sharply. Reports indicate that the United States is preparing aggressive economic and maritime actions targeting Iranian oil shipments worldwide. A move designed to cripple Tehran's revenue streams, but one that risks triggering wider retaliation. At the same time, global markets are already reacting. Oil prices are climbing again, with analysts warning of sustained volatility as diplomatic talks collapse and military pressure increases. This is no longer just a geopolitical standoff. It is an economic pressure wave, one that threatens to hit everything from gas prices to global inflation. And yet, here is the contradiction. While headlines scream collapse, parts of the U.S. economy have shown surprising resilience, with stock markets rebounding after brief ceasefire signals and energy flows stabilizing, at least temporarily. That contradiction is the story. Because beneath the surface stability, something far more fragile is unfolding. A system increasingly dependent on geopolitical calm, now facing renewed instability. The White House is watching closely. Markets are watching nervously. And global leaders are preparing for scenarios that, until recently, seemed unthinkable. This is not just about war. This is about what happens when conflict collides with the global economy. And the consequences could be far more severe than anyone is willing to admit, at least publicly. If you want clear, fact-based analysis on global crises like this, the kind that goes beyond headlines and into the real story, make sure to subscribe now. Because what happens next may reshape not just this conflict, but the global economic order itself. To understand how this crisis reached such a critical point, it is necessary to step back, not days or weeks, but decades. The tension between the United States and Iran did not emerge overnight. It is the product of a long, layered history of mistrust, confrontation, and strategic rivalry that has repeatedly brought the region to the brink. The modern phase of this conflict can be traced back to 1979, the Iranian Revolution. That single event transformed Iran from a U.S.-aligned monarchy into a revolutionary Islamic republic openly opposed to American influence in the Middle East. Diplomatic ties were severed, sanctions began, and a cycle of hostility was set in motion. Through the 1980s and 1990s, the relationship remained adversarial but contained. Proxy tensions existed. Rhetoric was sharp, but direct confrontation was largely avoided. That began to change in the early 2000s. Following the U.S. invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, Iran found itself surrounded by American military presence. At the same time, Washington grew increasingly concerned about Tehran's nuclear ambitions. By 2015, a breakthrough appeared possible. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, widely known as the Iran nuclear deal, temporarily reduced tensions. Sanctions were eased. Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program. For a brief moment, the trajectory shifted toward diplomacy. But that stability did not last. In 2018, the United States withdrew from the agreement and reimposed sweeping sanctions. The pressure campaign intensified rapidly, targeting Iran's oil exports, the backbone of its economy. From that point forward, escalation became cyclical. 2019, attacks on oil tankers in the Gulf raised alarms about maritime security. 2020, a major turning point, the killing of a top Iranian military commander triggered direct retaliation from Iran against U.S. forces in Iraq. 2021-2023, attempts to revive nuclear negotiations stalled repeatedly, with both sides accusing the other of bad faith. Then came the current phase, far more dangerous and far more complex. Over the past year, tensions have quietly built beneath the surface. Iran expanded aspects of its nuclear program. The United States increased sanctions enforcement. Regional proxy conflicts intensified, but the real shift began just weeks ago. Day 1. Reports emerge of increased U.S. naval activity in the Persian Gulf. Day 3. Iran signals that any interference with its oil exports will be met with decisive action. Day 5. Diplomatic talks collapse, removing the last buffer between economic pressure and military escalation. Day 7. Global markets react sharply as oil traders begin pricing in risk. Day 10. Intelligence leaks suggest potential U.S. plans to intercept or seize Iranian-linked oil shipments. Each step alone might have been manageable. Together, they formed a chain reaction. At the center of this timeline are three key actors: the United States, seeking to apply maximum economic pressure while maintaining military deterrence; Iran, determined to resist sanctions and protect its oil exports at all costs; global markets, increasingly sensitive to any disruption in energy supply, reacting in real time. What makes this moment different from previous crises is not just the political tension, it is the economic fragility surrounding it. In earlier decades, regional conflict did not always translate into immediate global financial instability. Today, the connection is instantaneous. Every tanker movement, every naval deployment, every diplomatic breakdown, all of it feeds directly into markets that are already strained by inflation, supply chain disruptions, and post-pandemic recovery pressures. This is the foundation of the current crisis. Not a sudden event, but a slow buildup of pressure, now reaching a critical threshold. And as the timeline shows, once that threshold is crossed, events no longer move in isolation. They accelerate. The crisis did not erupt in a single moment. It unfolded in stages, fast, fragmented, and deeply contested. What we know begins with a series of coordinated moves that signaled a sharp escalation in U.S. strategy toward Iran's energy network. According to multiple reports, U.S. authorities initiated efforts to track and potentially intercept oil shipments believed to be linked to Iranian exports. These operations were not publicly announced as military actions. Instead, they appeared to operate in a gray zone, blending legal enforcement, maritime monitoring, and strategic pressure. Then came the trigger point. A cluster of commercial vessels operating near critical shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf reported unusual activity. Navigation disruptions, increased surveillance, unconfirmed encounters with patrol units. None of these incidents, on their own, amounted to open conflict. But together, they created a pattern, one that traders and intelligence agencies could not ignore. Within hours, the first shockwave hit global markets. Oil prices spiked sharply as risk calculations changed almost instantly. Insurance premiums for tankers moving through the region surged. Shipping companies began rerouting vessels or delaying departures altogether. From there, the situation escalated further. Side A, the U.S. position, maintains that these actions are targeted enforcement measures. The objective is to disrupt illicit oil flows and enforce long-standing sanctions. From this perspective, the operation is legal, controlled, and designed to avoid direct military confrontation. Side B, the Iranian perspective, tells a very different story. Tehran has framed these actions as economic warfare. Officials argue that interfering with oil shipments in international waters crosses a red line. More importantly, they have warned that any sustained disruption will be met with a response, not necessarily symmetrical, but strategic. And that is where uncertainty begins to grow, because the evidence available so far is incomplete. There are no fully verified reports of direct military engagement, no confirmed strikes, no official declaration of escalation from either side. But intelligence signals point to something more complex, a controlled confrontation operating below the threshold of open war, at least for now. Satellite tracking data shows irregular shipping patterns. Maritime alerts indicate elevated risk levels across key routes. And financial markets continue to react as though the threat is real, even if the details remain partially obscured. This is what makes the situation particularly volatile. In traditional conflicts, escalation is visible: troop movements, missile launches, airstrikes. Here, escalation is subtle. It happens through economic pressure, through maritime maneuvering, through signals that may or may not be intentional. And in this kind of environment, miscalculation becomes the greatest risk. A single misinterpretation, a single overreaction, A single step beyond the current threshold. Any one of these could transform a controlled standoff into something far more dangerous. For now, both sides appear to be operating carefully, pushing boundaries without crossing into full-scale conflict. But the margin for error is shrinking. And as events continue to unfold, one question is becoming increasingly urgent. How long can this balance hold before it breaks?